afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth de Spaldyng, and this class is called Diaspora, and it is about Anglo-Saxon refugees in the 11th century. It is not about every Anglo-Saxon group of refugees in the 11th century. It's about one in particular. And I've been doing a lot of reading on this topic, and so I'm hoping to present additional classes after this that are related. So I may not touch on everything that you could be interested in on this topic. This is just where I'm starting. I want to kind of start out by talking about when I first joined the SCA, like, I don't know, in 1992. Um, I remember there were always a lot of people back then, and you don't see this so much now, but people who wanted to have a persona that came from everywhere. Like, I'm Irish, but I kind of am Japanese too, and I'm also, my parents came from Brazil, and, you know, ran into Columbus on the way and stuff like that, where people want to try to include everything in the whole world that they might be interested in their persona and in their research. And that is something that it's hard to make decisions about where you want to be, and some of us never really decide. So I've always had kind of a little interest in the back of my mind for the last 30 years about which groups of people got around more in the Middle Ages, which groups of people traveled and experienced different cultures to where you could actually portray one of these people and actually have legitimate knowledge of what was going on in a completely different part of the world, or that you might even be somebody from one culture living in a different place, and it was like a legitimate thing to have done. So with that, let me share my screen and hope that all works out okay. Um, okay, wait, here we go. Not sharing with that. Go away. Okay. And let me make a slideshow. Here we go. Does everybody see something that says preface?
No, we're just seeing a black bar right now. So
Oh, crud. Okay. Hang on. Okay. This is what always happens to me
it's
when I
all good.
record. Um, that the thing doesn't want to come up behind it, and then I'm stuck. Okay.
Are you using multiple screens, Elizabeth?
Uh, you mean different? Wait, here we go. Okay.
Like
There.
different monitors?
No, I am not.
Okay.
Um, okay. Let me try this again. Because I'm really hoping this recording will come out decently. Okay. Do you see it now?
Yes,
Okay. Thank God.
there we
Okay.
go.
So this is going to be about Anglo-Saxon refugees who traveled to the Byzantine Empire, which maybe 5, 7 years ago was not really something I knew about at all. Um, I want to start out, and I don't know if this is going to take 15 minutes or like 57 minutes where I'll have to get booted out of this room. So we'll just see how quickly this material presents itself. I wanted to start out with a couple of quotes from Anglo-Saxon literature. Um, Let me try to move this here so I can see the whole screen. Um, Hold on, I lost my share. There we go. Can y'all still see that?
Yep, you're still good to go.
Okay, so I wanted to start out with a couple of pieces of Anglo-Saxon literature, some quotes that talk about people having to leave their homeland. The first one is just an anonymous English poem from the 11th century, translated saying, "Understand that you will have to leave your temporary dwelling, your home and native land. It is not known where your Lord will send you then, where you can no longer enjoy life, a home in your own country as you did before." And that's what happened to a lot of English folks who decided to leave England after the Norman conquest. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says in 1067 that in this year the king went oversea, and this is William of Normandy, who has become king by then. He went away, he took with him some hostages and treasures. When he returned the next year, he gave away every man's land. So these are people who have had their country taken over and they have been dispossessed by the Normans. If you are somebody who does not know a whole lot about the Norman conquest or the Battle of Hastings or 1066, I've linked a video right here, and I'm going to send this to everybody who's signed up for the class. So if you will please add your name so that our wonderful TA can include everybody, then I can send you this presentation, and you could watch this if you want to learn more about what actually happened in the Norman conquest and why the Battle of Hastings occurred and how we all arrived at that point. Okay, so the Anglo-Saxons, or the English, basically lost their country, their nation, to the Normans after 1066. It was a complete disaster for them. Their culture kind of dissipated. And they became a bit of an underclass. I won't say that every Anglo-Saxon person disappeared or that everything about them went away, because obviously we have a lot of those vestiges today, but it was certainly a different place after that. King Harold was killed on October 14th, 1066, and there was no direct heir to the line of the previous king, Edward the Confessor. So even though there were some people who tried to take the throne who came from the Anglo-Saxon royal house or were connected with it, but they just weren't successful. There were a lot of rebellions in the late 1060s, early 1070s, but William the Conqueror, William of Normandy, managed to squash them all. He didn't fully get control of the country until 1075 because the English resisted for a long time. They tried to hook up with Sweyn of Denmark, Sweyn II of Denmark, to take back the throne, but that didn't really work out for them either. I've got some different illustrations here, some of which don't really relate to this topic. They're just Anglo-Saxon art from the 11th century. This is the sort of thing the English were producing at the time. So after 1066, there were a few Saxons who kept their lands and titles. Some intermarried with the Normans. Many became part of a permanent underclass, having lost their lands. But some people decided to actually leave England and go somewhere else. Some went to Ireland, some went to Scotland. Many of the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy didn't want to live under Norman rule. They couldn't overthrow it. They packed up their families, the fighting men in their household, and they became refugees looking for a new home. So the group of people that I'm going to be focusing on today didn't really have a plan when they left England. They just thought, we're going to go until we find a place that is friendly to us. The sources concur that all this happened around 1075. There's no extant documentation from the actual year that this happened, but in the generations following, there were some people who wrote down what happened to them, and the sources are relatively congruent. That means they tell the same story. So they're relatively reliable. There just wasn't much left for those folks in England. By 1086, according to the Domesday Book, there were only about 10%, 5 to 10% of the people who had owned land before the conquest in England were the same people who still owned it after 1066. So there were a group of Anglo-Saxons who went to a place that they renamed Nova Anglia or New England. And most of us, especially as Americans, were used to referring to New England as a region of British colonial America. But this story is going to be about a much older New England, dating to the 11th century, populated by refugees of this Norman invasion. Um, According to the primary sources that we're going to look at today, Nova Anglia was located in what has now become the Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea. Um, and again, this is some more Anglo-Saxon art. There's evidence that by the late 1000s, the Byzantine Empire's Varangian Guard included a significant number of Anglo-Saxon warriors. Now, a lot of us in the SCA know about the Varangian Guard, and we think, oh, the Vikings, they were in the Varangian Guard. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. Anglo-Saxons were a major part of the Varangian Guard up through the Fourth Crusade, and they were at the Siege of Constantinople in 1204. These were all people who came to the Byzantine Empire after 1066. So the questions that we're asking today are why, who were they, how did they get there, and what are the sources that support this story. So first of all, not everybody knows about the Varangian Guard, so let's talk about what that is too, because I didn't know all the details of this before I started researching it. First of all, this is an illustration of a Byzantine emperor being followed by a guard who could be people from his Varangian Guard. This is from a chronicle of the 13th century, so it's a later picture. He was an emperor in the 9th century. Anyway, so the Varangians were originally Swedish settlers, and they left Scandinavia for all the reasons that Scandinavian people in the 8th and 9th century left. And they populated what has become known as Russia and the Ukraine. They became known as the Rus, which comes from the Finnish word for Swedes, ruotsi. And ruotsi in turn comes from the Norse word for a crew of oarsmen. The Rus set up a state that became known as Kievan Rus in the 800s. And the word Varangian comes from an Old Norse word that means sworn companion, and it kind of refers to someone who's a foreigner who's sworn allegiance to a ruler in a new land, like he's no longer in the place where he was born. This is a map of the Kievan Rus state in the 11th century, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at and where we're talking about. I like maps a lot. I like to teach with maps whenever possible. So this map on the left is a modern European map. Okay, so this is where you're used to seeing your European countries. The map on the right is what it looked like in the 11th century. So you can see the Kievan Rus state and the Byzantine Empire, and it's kind of right up there with the Bulgarian Empire and the Kingdom of Hungary. There were a lot of Turkic peoples in this area also. So that's sort of who's populating this area around the time period that we're talking about. So maps are really helpful to kind of orient yourself to what's going on. So that's a long way from England, okay? And we'll talk about the route that they took also. Okay, so back to the Varangian Guard. This is another emperor flanked by soldiers in the Varangian Guard, and these are specifically noted as being in the Varangian Guard, and I'm not sure what this white hat is all about. I'm kind of interested in that. So the Swedes who first went out to what became Kievan Rus were traders, and they traded in amber, furs, slaves, other goods, but they were also raiders and looters. They weren't just calm and peaceful people. They took some stuff on the way to enrich themselves. And they became the personal bodyguard of the emperor. They served as early as 874 when Rus warriors were sent to help out the Byzantine Emperor Basil II in an agreement made by the Kievan Rus ruler Vladimir II. So they'd been there a while, the Swedes. The Varangian Guard was officially established under Basil II, like it became an official thing, even though they'd been there for a while. So that was in the 10th century, early 11th century. Scandinavians flocked to the Varangian Guard, and it eventually included Swedes, Norwegians, Danes, and Icelanders before the Anglo-Saxons ever even arrived. The Byzantine emperors specifically wanted people who were not from the Byzantine Empire to be in this guard because they could be deployed to put down rebellions and disturbances, and at least supposedly they would not be people who were susceptible to taking a side, to political intrigue, to betraying the emperor, any of those things. He felt like he was pretty safe with these foreigners who were beholden to him. And that is, oh, wait, let me go back there. That is probably, if I can even go back, Lord have mercy. Okay, hang on. I've gone too far. Let me stop the share. Gosh darn it. Okay. Sorry, I got to go back to the... It doesn't give me a back button. I'll have to remember that for the next time. Okay. Okay.
While Elizabeth is doing that, type in the chat what your interest in the Anglo-Saxons is. I'm curious to hear it.
I'll look forward to reading that. Okay. Y'all, this is like a damn nightmare. And now that's in my recording. Okay. Can you see that, y'all?
Yeah.
Thank God. Okay. What I was trying to go back and look at here was this is probably the most famous manuscript illustration of the Varangian Guard in the 12th century. So you can imagine that by the 12th century, some of these people might be the descendants of our Anglo-Saxons, but we'll get to that. Okay. So the earliest source for this exile is a churchman named Orderic Vitalis, who was half English, half Norman, and he wrote of events of the Norman conquest. Sometime between 1110 and 1115, so it's not that much later, he wrote a work called Historia Ecclesiastica, or Church History, which basically detailed the history of Christianity from the birth of Jesus up to the point that he lived. And it also featured a lot of contemporary events, including the Norman conquest, so we get some good information from him. This is a plaque commemorating his work, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So he was born in Shropshire, England in 1075, so he would have been born after the conquest. He was the son of a French priest and an English mother at a time when the church didn't fully restrict priests getting married. It was kind of frowned upon, but they could still do it. He served the Norman-born Earl of Shrewsbury as a child, and he studied under an English monk. Of course, he was half English. His parents paid for him to go to Normandy when he was 10 years old to be schooled there, but he arrived not speaking any French. And throughout the rest of his career in the church, he remained in France primarily, but he was always very attached to his English origins. Um, we're not going to read through all this, but these are the quotes that I'm using from his source. His work, Historia Ecclesiastica, is in several volumes, and this is towards the end of book 4, where he talks about. Well, here I'm going to sum it up. This is all the stuff that when I send you this, if you want to go back and read the original source, you can. I've summed it up right here. So he states that the English couldn't throw off Norman rule after 1066, and they went to serve a Byzantine emperor. And along with the Scandinavians who served the emperor, the Anglo-Saxons were very fierce warriors, and they served faithfully for many generations. They fought with their distinctive weapon, the battle axe. And according to Orderic, many of the Saxons who went were of Danish, Norwegian extraction because they came from northern England, many of them, and they fit in well with the Scandinavians who were already serving the emperor. Because, of course, remember, a lot of these Scandinavian folks in England intermarried with the Saxons in the Danelaw and up towards the north. Eventually, the English made up the majority of the Varangian Guard. The Swedes who eventually served them kind of stopped serving in the Guard after a certain point because the Swedish king decided that people who had served there were no longer eligible to inherit land in their homeland, and so they couldn't pass it on to their children. So there weren't as many Scandinavians serving there after a while. Later historians comment on the English being part of the Varangian Guard at the siege of Constantinople in 1204. This is a little summary of the Fourth Crusade if you don't know anything about that. It was initiated by Pope Innocent III to take back Jerusalem from the Muslims, like had all the ones before that. The Crusaders never did unseat the Egyptian Sultan who controlled Jerusalem at the time, but they did manage to take over and divide Constantinople. They tried to restore an emperor who had been deposed by factions within the Byzantine Empire a few years before. They put in a new emperor, he got murdered, and so then the Crusaders decided to take over the city. And this wasn't exactly a positive thing because even though they were able to capture Constantinople in 1204, they fractured into 3 Crusader states, and it didn't get made up back into the a unified empire until 1261. This is a later image of the siege of Constantinople in a 14th century work, but it kind of gives you an idea. You can see the walls of Constantinople here that are very famous. People fighting from the outside, going there in ships. Okay. During the Fourth Crusade, there was a French knight named Geoffrey de Villehardouin, and he was an eyewitness to the siege of Constantinople, and he's one of the primary sources for our English Varangians. He wrote an account of the event called Of the Conquest of Constantinople in 1204, and at the conclusion of the siege, Villehardouin noticed that the emperor's forces had set Englishmen and Danes with their axes at the gate and right up to the palace. And this corroborates the story of Orderic Vitalis, who writes that the English and the Danes supported the Byzantine emperor using their native axes. Okay, so there are other primary sources that relate more about the Anglo-Saxons than their involvement in the Varangian Guard. But of I think I've got a typo here. There are 2 sources that describe their journey. They went basically from Britain, kind of around Europe, and into Southwest Asia. There are two sources that describe their journey around Spain and through the Straits of Gibraltar. I've put a picture of the Bayou Tapestry here just so you can think about the kind of ships that they might have been traveling in. The longer and more detailed, there are one of the sources that is longer and more detailed was the saga of Edward the Confessor, written in Old Norse and called Jotvarðr Saga. It was compiled in the 14th century, most likely at an Augustinian monastery in Iceland. So we have an Old Norse source for this as well. And then there's another anonymous French source from 1291 that also references this journey. Okay, now this is the saga of Edward the Confessor, the section that talks about what we need to read. We're not going to read through this right now. I've summed it up as well. This is the section of the Chronicon Universal Anonymi Laudonensis of 1291. We're going to go to the summary here to talk about it. So this is, we're talking about their exile to Europe, getting around the Mediterranean and arriving in Constantinople. So according to the Jotvarðr saga, the saga of Edward, the saga of Edward the Confessor, which tells the whole story of the Norman conquest from the point of view of these saga writers, the English escaped with a great host of 350 ships. So this is the first thing that tells us how many ships took them. 350 is a lot. And you can imagine what sort of a building project that would have been for these people to undertake to be able to leave England. There were 3 earls and 8 barons. That doesn't mean that there were just 11 people. It was those people and their extensive households. So there might have been thousands of people on these ships. Sigurd, the Earl of Gloucester, was their main leader. And we don't know a whole lot about him either. The English were not always peaceful travelers, as I've talked about before. They ravaged areas they passed through in order to collect riches, trade goods, and supplies. They looted the town of Septa in North Africa, and according to one of the sources, took so much fee in gold and silver that it was more even than what they had taken away with them from England. So they became wealthier on their trip. Then they sacked Majorca and Minorca, and they stayed a while in Sicily. So they, it could have been 1076 or even 1077 by the time they actually arrived in Constantinople. While in the Mediterranean, they heard of wars in Micklegarth, which was the Norse name for Constantinople, that the city was under siege by pagans. They knew that Scandinavians had served in the Varangian Guard and enjoyed a good life in Constantinople, and they thought, hey, this is where we're going to go. So upon arriving in the city, the English engaged the enemy immediately. They defeated them, and the emperor was impressed. They were welcomed by the men of the city, taken to meet the emperor, who in the sources is often referred to as the king of the Greeks. He gave them many gifts. He gave them a place to live, but that wasn't permanent. There were some Anglo-Saxons who remained in the city of Constantinople, and they took posts in the emperor's army and in the navy, in the Varangian Guard. This picture here shows the ruin of a church that they established for themselves in Constantinople that's identified as the Church of St. Nicholas and St. Augustine of Canterbury, so you know it's an English church, that was built and used by the English Varangians. But most of the English wanted their own land. In the Jotvarðr saga, Earl Sigurd of Gloucester, didn't think that that was a good deal to just be beholden to the emperor, and he wanted them to have their own place. He asked for a place that they could rule as their own and give to their heirs. And they were probably trying to recoup what they lost in England, for the generations. They didn't have any land to pass on to their children. The emperor knew, according to the sources, that he couldn't take land away from his own lords, so he granted them land that comprises some part of modern Crimea, or maybe the whole thing. That is not said in the sources. That had once been part of the Byzantine emperor, but it had fallen into the hands of pagans. Hands of pagans, that is said a number of times, and it could be that it fell into the hands of Muslims or some of the Turkic people who lived in the area. That's hard to know as well. But he said, if you can win this back, you can have it. And he granted it to them, quote, free from tax and toll. And so they depended on that. They thought, okay, this is our chance. So they went over there and I guess they beat the heck out of the hands of the pagans and they won the land. They took it for their own. They actually retained their religious identity, and the sources specifically remark on that they did not want to be part of the Eastern Orthodox Church, and their priests were consecrated in Hungary, which was not part of the Eastern Church, because they, quote, did not want to be dependent on the Patriarch of Constantinople. This idea of not paying taxes to the emperor came up again because at some point a tax collector showed up in Nova Anglia and they killed him. So they were serious about not wanting to pay taxes. The Jotvarder saga finishes with this quote. This is the last line of the saga of Edward the Confessor. The land lies 6 days and nights sail across the sea in the east and northeast from Micklegarth. And there is the best of land there, and that folk has abode there ever since. So, it's kind of a neat way to end it. So this is a map of their trip, leaving from the south of England, going around Spain and Portugal, through the Straits of Gibraltar, past Sicily and to Constantinople, and then eventually going across the Black Sea to Crimea around 1075. There is also some supporting evidence for them being there and setting up a settlement. There's evidence that the Byzantine Empire wanted to remove the Turks from Crimea at the end of the 11th century, that they thought that those people in some of their hinterlands was a problem, and so it was actually convenient to the emperor to have these English folks show up, need land of their own, because he could kind of kill two birds with one stone, give them something for helping him out, and get rid of these people that he didn't want on the edges of his empire. There are also places derived from those in England shown on later maps that are referred to in the Chronicon and the Jotvarder saga. So there are cities that they established, or towns, villages, what have you, that are clearly named after places in England. And I'll show you that on a map in a second. The Jotvarder saga has a quote about that. It says, after they took the land into possession and gave it a name and called it England. To the towns that were in the land and to those which they built, they gave the names of the towns of England. They called them both London and York, and by the names of other great towns of England. So it's pretty cool to have this all attested to in these early sources. This is a modern map that this author made of the area. And you can see here, I've used this modern map because I'm going to show you a period map that remains, and it's very hard to read. You've got Londina, Wheatonchester, Abingdon, Suzaco, which some historians think is Sussex, Dofras, that could be related to Dorset, towns ending with the word Bury, Norbury, Bendenbury. The WIC is clearly a Saxon town suffix. So they're all here on Crimea, on the mainland, and around the Sea of Azov. This is a period map that shows a lot of these places that is from the 16th century. So we don't know who exactly was living in these towns at that point, if it was descendants of these English people or completely different people entirely, but a lot of these place names are the same, and that's pretty neat. There are also accounts from traveling Franciscan friars who were sent on a mission to the Mongols by Pope Innocent IV in the 1240s, and they refer to people living on Crimea and around the Sea of Azov called the Saxi. And they were Christians, and they maintained a separate identity from the other people in the region. And this is a quote from one of those Franciscan sources. It's in a book called Mission to Asia. That's in my I'll show you the bibliography at the end. When we were there, we were told that the Tartars besieged a certain city of these Saxi and tried to subdue it. The inhabitants, however, made engines to match those of the Tartars, all of which they broke, so they're making siege engines too. And the Tartars were not able to get near the city to fight owing to these engines and missiles. At last they made an underground passage, and bursting forth into the city, they tried to set fire to it while others fought. But the inhabitants posted a group to put out the fire, and the rest fought valiantly with those who had penetrated into the city, and killing many of them and wounding others, they forced them to retire to their own army. The Tartars, realizing they could do nothing against them and that many of their men were dying, withdrew from the city. So they were still a very fierce people. So how long did Nova Anglia remain a distinctly English settlement? What happened to them? There isn't a good answer for that. The 14th century compiler of the Old Norse stories contained in Jotvarðr saga stated that the English abode there ever since. And I read that earlier. Their initial settlement was in the 1070s, so that's telling us that at least by the sometime in the 1300s, they're still there. There was a mid-14th century source called the De Officiis of Pseudo-Codinus, which stated that the Varangians were still a separate people and wished the emperor good tidings at Christmas, quote, in their native tongue, that is English. So this is a mystery. I'm still looking into it. I'm still reading about it. These are the primary sources that I looked at for this research. You can see the Chronicon Universal, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the Geoffrey de Villehardouin, the Saga of Edward the Confessor. And these are not good bibliographic entries. These are internet links. If I ever wrote this up into some kind of a article, obviously this would have proper formatting. And of course, Orderic Vitalis and his. There are a lot of secondary sources I looked at as well. There are tons of them in book form and on the internet, and they're here as well. Let me stop this share and just say a couple more things before we go to the questions. Today I focused just on the Anglo-Saxons who went to Crimea and who were in the Varangian Guard and who made a settlement in the Byzantine Empire. There were Anglo-Saxons who went other places, who married into the Kievan Rus, who went to Ireland, who married into Scotland. I just figured those are whole other classes, and I'd like to cover those at some point. So if there are things that you didn't hear about things that you've read about, for different places that the English went after 1066, please know that you're right. They did go a lot of other places. Okay, so that's about all I have today. It is, what time is it? I don't even know.
Got 10 more minutes before the
10 more minutes. Does anybody have anything to say? Were there any questions?
Well, Kay has a question. So is the 14th century the latest evidence we have for Nova Anglia still existing?
Yes. But there is that 16th century map where people still live there, but we don't know who they are.
Um,
So I guess yes and maybe. Or
and
just
then,
if anybody has comments.
yeah, we've got a bunch of comments about, as you were talking, different things. Uh, People talking about their persona or why they were interested in coming here from Alfric's question.
Oh, good.
Um,
Look at all those comments. Oh, I
yeah,
loved. How do I read those?
I will save a copy of the chat for you, and I'll send you a copy of
Oh,
that
I would love
uh,
that because I'd love to read those.
export.
Um,
And I will
I want to
grab
take
all of
this.
them.
No, go ahead.
Uh, yeah, go ahead.
I want to just take this back to what I said at the beginning about how I remembered all these people saying, when I first joined the SCA, my persona is Japanese, but I've been to North Africa and stuff like that. And I remember at that time thinking that is so ridiculous. Why would you make a persona like that? But there are actually situations where you can make a persona like that, where people did travel, I think, a lot more than what we give them credit for. And this is the period of my persona. I think I run around and do a lot of music and other stuff, but this is the period of my persona and one of the periods that I am most interested in.
Um, Margala has a question. When the English stayed in Sicily, did they have any interactions with the Normans that were already there or that came there?
I don't know. They maybe did, and that may be there may be a source for that, but I haven't seen it.
There?
Elizabeth, this was so good.
Did you like it?
This was fabulous. I had
Good.
no idea about any of this history before this.
Well, I didn't either a few years ago, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. I'm getting every book that is, and um anyway, so and I've got a bunch of books, and I was going to bring them to the class and like show and tell, but I didn't do that.
Uh,
I can make a post about that later.
Julius, did you have a question?
No, that was giving the light bulb for the awesomeness and all the like
Yeah.
light bulb moments from this class. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know that the Complete Anachronist is always looking for good articles. So if you do write it up, you should submit it,
I
honestly. I
okay.
think it would be an amazing CA.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. It's kind of if I send you this, please don't send it anywhere because the sources are just kind of listed right now. But
And
I'll
yeah,
tell
if
you,
anybody else
but the,
wants these, send me. You can message me or put it just in chat, your email, and I'll make sure that it's part of the attendance that I send over to Elizabeth, so that they can mark you as here.
And if you have it online, if it's like a Google presentation or something,
I do.
you
Yeah.
can actually send that out when you're in the admin side of university. When if you were to go into, mark students attended, you can actually email all of your students and send out a link to the presentation
No,
to read only.
I plan to do that. Yep.
Awesome.
I'm hoping that my wonderful TA will put
I've been
them on that list. Do they go on that list, these extra emails that you're getting? Will they go on that
I
list?
don't have access to the backside of the system, to the internal part of the system as a teacher, so I'm just collecting them in a text document, and I will send that to you since I
Okay.
have your email.
That's fine, and I can do that too. So
Yeah,
so some people may get it twice,
it's
I,
and
possible.
then that's fine.
Elizabeth,
I,
can I ask a couple questions?
Yeah, sure.
So, because I started Googling on my phone, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Because my first thought was when you said you don't know when the Saxon people of that area no longer were the main population, I was like, my first thought was the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Maybe that's when it ended, but there, like you said, there's nothing to tie in there yet. Do you know when the town name started changing from less English style and Saxon style
No,
names
I
to
have
the
not.
more modern
I've
day names?
I've actually thought about that, and I have not researched that
Okay,
yet.
because that might help a little bit with the
It, it might,
curiosity of it.
and wouldn't the archaeology there be interesting too? And of
Oh,
course, now that area is totally off limits, but I don't think they've done any digs there at all.
I have a thought. Uh, has anybody done any DNA research in that area? You know,
I thought of that too, like to see how much has carried over. It kind of would depend on how many population shifts there have been over time, which of course would explain to you whether or not they stayed there. You know what I mean?
Excuse me for interrupting, but Christina, we need you out in the great room.
Okay, be right there.
Do we need to finish?
We've got about 4 minutes left, and if
Oh, okay.
folks
Okay.
do want to continue asking questions, we can always decamp to one of the overflow rooms. That part won't be recorded, but we can always, that's what they're there for. So yeah, about yeah,
No,
like I said, 4 minutes left. So.
it's a huge um, field for the imagination, this particular topic, because it's kind of like the settlers on Roanoke Island or something. It's like what happened to them. Um, um, I find one thing I found fascinating was what would they be wearing? Because when I found this topic, I was really interested in 11th century Anglo-Saxons and people kind of at the end of their English civilization and the end of their power. But then when I found out they went to the Byzantine Empire, I was like, well, they don't have to just wear Anglo-Saxon clothes. They could wear other clothes. And how would that look like as a hybrid? So I've been really interested in that as well.
yeah, the environment would dictate a change of clothes.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course, not so much wool, you
yeah.
know. Um, anyway, so it's just like how much Byzantine uh everyday life, goods of everyday life would they have been using? Like how would it have changed their life ways and the way they did everyday chores and things like that? I mean, it's just kind of mind-boggling.
And then just a bunch of comments about fascinating topic. Thank you for sharing. Excellent class. Can't wait to see what else you find.
The
Uh,
Sicilian Normans, yeah, I saw that.
oh yeah.
That they adopted local styles. Yeah.
So yeah. All right. So it is 2 till, so we'll probably be
That's fine.
wrapping
We
up.
can,
I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording, but if folks, like I said, if folks
yeah.
want to move over to an overflow room, that's perfectly acceptable.
Oh, wait, I can't go to an overflow room. I have a 2 o'clock class I have to teach.
Oh,
So
okay.
go to your
So
own overflow room. I'm sorry. That's
no
terrible.
worries.
I
All good.
can't do that. I can't, no, I
Like I
can't
said,
do
I'll send
that.
you the I'll
See,
send
I
you
was
the
totally in Anglo-Saxon
info.
mode and I'm like, I can't do that. I have to play music at 2 o'clock.
No worries. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording real quick.
Thank you.